It's kind of hard for me to believe that just, 2 days ago, I turned 60 years old. And I know, I always thought that at 60 I'd be pretty much nearly dead. And when I always thought of 60 when I was younger, I thought of 60 as pretty much the year before you died or the year right after you died. But I didn't think of 60 as a time where you're looking at your life and wondering if you fulfilled everything you're supposed to do, and do you still have enough time to get things done. And maybe you've experienced what I felt in my own life, that there's just so much more that you want to do, so much more that you feel like is inside of you. Because I can tell you, at 60, I feel like I'm just getting started. I feel like I'm just at the beginning of great things. And yeah. But I've always had this haunting feeling that I'm just a step behind. That I started a little bit too late, was a little bit too slow, just wasn't talented enough or smart enough or quick enough or just something enough. And wondered if I had wasted the greatest opportunities and potential in my life. Which is why I really appreciate that Aaron focused on Moses today. Because I think that for many of us, Moses really is iconic. His story carries so much of what's inside of us. I was at 2 different events over the last couple of months where I heard a phrase that just struck me. One is, my wife is a farm girl. She grew up on a farm, and we live in the city, and she always wants to go visit the country, and I kind of like staying near the concrete. And so I took her up to this farm in Northern California because I met we made some friends, and they have a farm, so I knew she'd love it. We went up there, and the husband's name is Matthew, and he started walking me around the farm. And I wasn't that interested at first, but then I became really interested as he talked. And he was explaining to me that they've been vegans and vegetarians throughout their lives, but they had sheep, and their farm was sort of chaotic. It wasn't one of those farms where you see like olive trees, or you see orange trees, or you see grape leaves, or you see whatever turnips. It was as if all these things were just jumbled up everywhere. And I wondered why there wasn't structure and organization. They explained to me that only humans try to standardize everything, that nature is actually very creative and complex. But so whenever you see the way humans try to organize nature, you see all the standardization. But when God creates things, you see all this wild beauty everywhere. And I started thinking about how in churches for too long, we thought discipleship was all about standardizing people. And really what God wants in the church is wild beauty. You can applaud at that. And then he explained to me that they have sheep there because the sheep eat the grass, and so they keep the grass controlled. And then they move the sheep every day so that when the sheep actually defecate, they don't stay and eat the same place where they pooped. Because he said in the wild, there are predators, and the predators naturally move herds. And if the predators did not exist, the herds would actually become infected, diseased, and they would die. But because there are predators, the herds keep moving, and they naturally graze the right amount as they move through. And then Matthew said this phrase. He goes, and we just leave the fertilizer right there at the farm because in nature, nothing's wasted. And that phrase really struck me. How in the creative process, in the creative order, the way God has designed the universe, there's nothing wasted. And then I was at another event called EG up in Carmel, California. My wife and I were up there, and it was like a lot of hippies who were intellectuals and really successful in the business world. And they brought in all these different speakers, and one of them was this wildlife photographer, and they followed this orangutan. And this orangutan, to their surprise, was on the last steps of their life. And so this orangutan walked over this river on this log and then laid on the log and simply died. And they captured this moment, the moment, the last breath of this orangutan's life. And they didn't want the orangutan its body to fall into the river, so they went and grabbed the orangutan and they moved it to the side of the river and laid it down on the ground. Then they came back 2 weeks later, and they showed the photograph of the orangutan when it had just died, and then they showed the photograph 2 weeks later, and there's nothing left but bone. The orangutan was not eaten by animals because it was dead, and animals do not eat dead animals usually. Only scavengers do. This orangutan was completely eaten by insects, which astonished me. And then the photographer said, because in nature, nothing's wasted. Now, how strange to be in two complete different environments, two complete parts of in the sense that the cultural world, and to hear this phrase twice, that in nature, nothing's wasted. And it started to occur to me that the reason there's nothing wasted in nature is because God created nature, and with God, there's nothing wasted. But then I thought how strange, and I mentioned this earlier, how we humans who are created by God actually have the capacity to create something that doesn't naturally reintegrate itself into the created order. And so we're the species that created plastics. And plastics are destroying the environment and killing so many species because we've created something that doesn't naturally reproduce life. Because the crazy thing is that in the natural order, even fertilizer, the thing that we would consider least valuable, actually brings life to the earth. How odd. And is it possible that this is a part of the human dilemma? That when we live outside of God's design for us, when we live outside of God's intention for us, what we're actually doing is creating plastics. And a part of what we struggle with is that we're suffocating because we have wrapped ourselves up in a plastic of an artificial life. And it doesn't produce life. But with God, in the most beautiful of all ways, nothing's wasted. So as we bring together this conference and we wrap together these thoughts of I am futurists, one of the great dilemmas when we talk about the future is our past. Because I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I felt like I don't have the opportunity or the capacity to create my future because I am drowning in my past. There's some of you here who haven't yet found a way to your future because you're trapped under the rubble of your past. Some of you, you're terrified that your future is just going to be a repetition of your past. And if you're not careful, your past will be your future unless you choose a different future. But I want you to know that your past can be in the past. Your past doesn't have to be your future. Your past is not your destiny. Your past is where you came from, but it's not where you're going. So Stephen, in the book of Acts, preaches his one and only message, and he takes a moment and talks about Moses. And we heard earlier, as Aaron unwrapped some of the struggle in Moses' own life, I love the idea of the boy who lived, of the one who survived. Can you imagine being the only one in your generation? So you become not only a symbol of life, but you become a symbol of death. Because your life reminds every other family that their sons did not survive. Moses carried death on his soul, the stench of death in his nostrils. See, we try to make Moses a reminder and a symbol of God's faithfulness, but for all those whose children died, it was a reminder of God's absence in their life. And so what Stephen said about Moses in Acts 7, beginning of verse 20, says, at that time Moses was born, he was no ordinary child. I do love that phrase, that he was no ordinary child. Because I think Moses looked ordinary when he was born. Don't you? I mean, I don't think Moses was born with the staff in his hand. I think he got the staff in his hand later. I think he was born with open hands, with nothing in his hands. I think he was naked, and he had no real value to society when he was born. He was a baby. Have you ever noticed that almost all animals are beautiful when they're born, except for humans? Like when horses are born, those little calves are just beautiful, elegant. I mean, even dogs, we call them puppies because they're so cute. Cats, can't stand cats, but cats, when they're born, they're even cute. They're kitties. Rabbits, baby rabbits are beautiful. Elephants, when they give birth to like a full-blown elephant, just miniature, boom. Walking, doing all their stuff, elephanting perfectly. But when humans are born, we don't even look human. We look alien. We have the giant head and a small appendage. And I'm telling you, I'm a parent. My son's here. I love my son. He's a very handsome guy. By the way, ladies, he's still single. We're taking him around the world looking for his wife. We know she's out there somewhere. But he was an ugly baby. I mean, when he was born, his mom said, "Look how beautiful he is." But he was like a bowling ball. One big old giant head and a little body sticking out. And I'm looking at him thinking, he looks like my grandmom. All wrinkled up. Where's the body? Why is that head so huge? And then my wife said, he's beautiful. She has to believe he's beautiful. She just went through the trauma of childbirth. What am I gonna? Oh, he's gorgeous. I'm like, oh God, help him grow into that head. I mean, we should just like roll our babies back and forth. And then humans, when we're born, we can't walk, we can't talk, we can't hold a job. We can't do anything. It takes, you know how long it takes for a human to develop into like a functioning human? Like 28 years. Functioning human for 2 years now. It's like, see, when Stephen says when Moses was born, he was no ordinary child, he's not saying that Moses was born glowing with a staff, let my people go, or anything like that. Stephen is looking back through Moses' life. See, I can tell you that when Aaron was born, he was no ordinary child. And I can tell you that because I'm looking through his life now to his birth. See, and I want you to know this. I've come to this conclusion, I'm absolutely certain I'm right, that there has never been one ordinary human being born on this planet. That when you were born, you were no ordinary child. When you were born, you were given the DNA of extraordinary. But if there has never been an ordinary human being born, the question then rises, how is it possible that there's no ordinary human being ever born, but so many of us die having lived tragically ordinary lives? Somewhere between our first breath and our last breath, life should leave us breathless. And somewhere along the way, most of us lose the extraordinary nature of who we are. See, the story of Moses begins by saying, when Moses was born, he was no ordinary child. We want you to know that this story is going somewhere. And I want you to know that God is looking at your life through the lens of your destiny. He says when he was born, he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. And Aaron talked about his struggle with identity. That struggle with identity that I wish Aaron never had to go through. And one day I said to him, you know, buddy, it's kind of crazy. I never knew my dad. So I got dad issues. And you know your dad. And you've got dad issues. I just kind of feel sorry for dads. Because like We're an issue. And I never knew my father, and all my life I wanted to know who he was. All my life I wanted to know something about him. And I thought maybe I could know me if I could know him. Like maybe if I could know what he was good at or what he looked like or what his interests were, what his passions were. Maybe if I knew if he had some natural talents, maybe I'd get some clue to what I was supposed to be. And I think all of us, we long to know where we came from so that we can know where we're going to. Can you imagine being Moses, being a Hebrew who was raised by the Egyptians, and you're raised in the very house by the man who killed everyone? He wants you dead, and now you're being raised by him. Your life, your safety is in the hands of the most dangerous, violent man in the world. And you thought you had family problems. See, and Moses could have lived his entire life pointing to the pain of his childhood and explaining why he never lived up to his potential. And the great danger that some of us here have is that you have real pain in your life, and you have real wounds in your life, and there's real brokenness in your life, and you can point to the very reasons it's there, and no one could even argue with you. But if you're going to spend your entire life blaming what happened to you to what's going to happen to you, you will live your life powerless. And I want you to know that every wound you've ever had to bear, every scar that marks your soul, every disappointment, every heartbreak, every tear, all of that with God, nothing's wasted. He'll take all that material and make you the person that he always intended for you to be. See, I would never wanted my kids to go through pain. I would have never wanted for Aaron to go through a season in his life where he ran from God and found himself filled with so much pain and anger and bitterness and emptiness. But I know because I think we all can resonate with this. I look back at my life, I wasted so much time in my life. And I know that has been even a part of his own internal struggle. But what's amazing with God is, all those years that you thought were just burned up, all those years you thought that you missed the opportunity that God had for you, God was just taking all that time and all that pain and all those wounds and all that brokenness. He's just going to use it as the material to create a beautiful masterpiece out of your life. In verse 21, it says, when he was placed outside. I highlighted that because I think a lot of us feel like we've been placed outside. I was an immigrant to the United States from a small country called El Salvador, and I know what it's like to be an immigrant from another country. I know what it's like to have to learn another language. My first language was Spanish. I had to learn English. I never even got to have my real name. In fact, that was funny when Aaron said he was the first legal McManus. That's actually true in many ways. Because when Aaron was legally McManus, McManus was still my alias. It wasn't even legally my name. I had to go to a judge and have my name changed to McManus since my kid was McManus already. And I got the name McManus from my stepdad, and that wasn't even his name. That was an alias for him too, because he was involved in creative underground economies. And all my life, I felt like I was an outsider looking in, an outsider looking in, an outsider looking in. I just never quite felt like I belonged. And it's taken me a little time to figure this out. No one's in the center. We're all on the outside looking in. I've never met a person who actually thought they were in the middle of the circle. It didn't matter how beautiful, how brilliant, how handsome, how talented, how rich, how successful, how famous. I've never met a person who didn't struggle with a sense of feeling like they were outside. Moses was placed outside, and I want you to know that if you feel like you've been placed outside, if you feel like you've been placed on the shelf, if you feel like you've been overlooked, if you feel like you were just the person never chosen, never picked, I want you to know that God allows us to be placed on the outside because that's where he chooses us so that we can relate and heal the person who's also on the outside. By the way, Jesus was placed on the outside. It was called a barn, a manger. Jesus was born on the outside. He had to flee to Egypt. He was an outsider all of his life. And then it goes on to tell us that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and powerful in speech and action. With God, there's nothing wasted, so every disappointment, every failure, every wound, every moment of pain, every moment of suffering, God is using that to shape who you are. So don't let it be wasted. But then he goes on to tell us that Moses was educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians. And I thought, what a waste. You ever felt like you got the wrong education? That you were trained for the wrong thing? Here Moses is educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians, becomes powerful in speech and action in their world, but he was never supposed to be a part of their world. He was going to create an entirely new world. He was never going to lead Egypt. He was going to lead the formation of a nation called Israel. Who could have ever guessed that Moses would become the founder of a nation? Oh, that's interesting. Where do you send someone to school to learn the skills of leading a nation? Probably the only person in the world, in his world, who could teach him that was the Pharaoh of an empire. Now, isn't it odd that God would have him raised in the home of an emperor so that Moses could learn how to found a nation? And see, with God, there's nothing wasted. Everything you learn is a part of the material that God's going to use to have you make an impact in the world, on the world. And I look back, and I didn't know what to do with my life. I didn't know I was going to be doing this. I never even thought I'd believe in God. It's so strange to me. So I have a degree in psychology and philosophy, and I thought, what a waste of time. I'm studying philosophy. What a waste to study the love of wisdom. What a waste of time to spend my life thinking about the meaning of life. How could God ever use that? Then I studied psychology, which means the study of the soul. What a waste of time to study the soul. How could God ever use that? In fact, I look back, and when I was 10, 11 years old, I was reading science fiction and reading some of the physicists who create these stories of other worlds and other species and other civilizations. How in the world could God ever use that? And I look back now, after 60 years, and I realize that everything I thought was a wasted education was exactly the education I needed for the world I was going to enter into. And I want you to know, I don't care if you were a dentist or a doctor or a teacher or a plumber. I don't care if you learned the skills of a carpenter or a construction worker. If you're here going, wait a minute, this is not what I want to do with my life. I just wasted all this training, all these years. I want you to know with God, there's nothing wasted. And everything you've ever been through, everything you've ever learned, and some of you didn't get a higher education, although you probably did. But some of you just went to the school of hard knocks. Some of you learned it on the street. But everywhere you take time to learn, you are being prepared for a future that God alone understands. Because with God, nothing is wasted. Moses was educated by the Egyptians. By the way, a lot of people, I don't know why, but a lot of Christians go, the only book you should read is the Bible. By the way, that's really, really stupid. And if the only book you read is the Bible, you probably will become really stupid. Because if you don't pursue truth and in every opportunity you have, you'll miss out on the beauty and complexity of all the truth God wants you to discover. See, all truth is God's truth. God created biology. God created botany. God created physics. God created math. Those are not subjects outside of God. God didn't just create the Bible. God created the universe, in case you don't know. See, God not only gave us all the truth in the Scripture, God gave us all the truth in nature. We need to stop using our faith as an excuse to be stupid. We need to be the sharpest, brightest minds in the world. A part of why I do this is I realize that a lot of times, really intelligent, thoughtful people think only stupid people believe in God. And I know I'm not supposed to say stupid people. I understand that that's not politically correct. But if you choose to be ignorant, that's the stupidest thing in the world you could do. See, when you deny your intelligence and your mind, you are not being a steward of what God's given you. We understand that with talent. Oh, he's such a great piano player. Wow, she plays the violin. Oh, man, he's an incredible football player. Wow, he should play basketball. We understand that with talent. Do you understand God also gave you intelligence? And so I just want to encourage you, if God put Moses in the school of the Egyptians, do you really think God doesn't want you to learn? We should be the smartest people in the world. The people of Jesus should be the most brilliant scientists. We should be the most brilliant botanists. We should understand physics better than anyone in the world. We should be the one exploring black holes and supernovas and dark matter and dark energy. We should be the ones writing about the theory of everything. But it's a great reminder, no matter what you learn, God's going to use that in some beautiful, beautiful way. My kids think I'm kind of like compulsive because I know all kinds of stuff about insects and animals and just really bizarre things because I just love learning. I love talking about fractals and event horizons. I love actually connecting dark matter and dark energy to our faith and our journey through mystery, because we need to realize that everything in creation informs us. So I want to pay attention, because the Bible says that all creation declares the glory of God. That means that the universe is screaming at us, telling us, pay attention, I have something to teach you about the creator of the universe. That for me is exciting. I want to learn from the Egyptians and the Hebrews. I want to learn from everyone who's hungry to learn. And Moses became powerful in speech and action. I think God wants to call some of you out. He wants to call you out to be the greatest communicators and thinkers, the greatest writers and teachers, the greatest philosophers and artists in the world. I think that we should astonish Egypt by the level and quality of everything we do. It's a good thing. You know, they tell us in, I guess, neuroscience that the human brain forms by the age of 12. And at the age of 12, your brain kind of like sets in. So whatever you pay attention to from birth to age of 12, that's what your brain does. And by the way, it's kind of cool. How many of you are would say like you're a creative genius? Raise your hand. You got the wrong people at the conference here. Okay, let me try a different one, okay? I know you're Asian, so you're humble. Okay. You didn't raise your hand, but you're going, they know. They know. How many of you would say that you're a linguistic savant? Raise your hand. Do you know what the word savant means? If you don't raise your hand. But okay. No. How many of you say you're a linguistic savant? Like you're a genius with languages? Okay, almost like no one again. Okay, all right. I might as well stop. And, okay, wait a minute. How many of you here speak English? Okay, that's all of you almost. Anybody here, is there like Malay? No, there's Mandarin? How many speak Mandarin? Wow, almost like all of you. Any other? Malay? I said Malay, you said no. Do you not understand English? We're having a communication problem here, okay? Linguistic savant, okay? And, how many of you speak Malay? Raise your hand. Oh my gosh, it's like everybody in here. Okay. How many of you speak Spanish? Raise your hand. Okay, I feel a little better. Okay, all right. So most of you raise your hand for 3 languages already, but you're not linguistic savants. Do you know how many languages Americans speak? 0. Okay. They just speak American. It's not even English, okay? And it's like, now I feel like Aaron going, this has nothing to do with my talk, but I'll get back to it in a minute. And, you know how old you were when you learned your first language? At 2? At 2 years old? You were 2 years old when you learned Malay? Or 2 years old when you learned Mandarin? Or 2 years old when you learned English? Or 2 years old when you were learning all 3? But no, you're not a linguistic savant. You're just normal. You see, when you were born, you were a linguistic savant. You could learn any language in the world. You could learn as many languages as your family told you needed to learn. And if they'd moved you to Tokyo, you would have learned Japanese at 2. If they had moved you to Germany, you would have learned German at 2. If they had moved you to England, you would have learned English at 2. The proper English, the Queen's English. Because you were a linguistic savant from the first day of your birth. Look at the person next to you and say, you are a linguistic savant. But there's others of you, if you were raised, let's say, in a different part of the world, like the United States, you would be taught, not by words, by practice, that no other language in the world matters except for English. So you would only learn one language. And you would think you were incapable of learning languages because your brain is lazy and it will only do what you tell it must do. See, you are a linguistic savant, but by the time you're 12, if you're not careful, your brain will solidify and you only have one language. I want you to know it's the same way with being a creative genius. 95% of children before the age of 12 have the ability, with what's called, to be divergent thinkers. That means you can think of 1,000 different answers to one problem. Only about 5% of kids are naturally convergent thinkers, where they only have one answer to every question. But by the time you're 12 years old, only 5% of humans remain divergent thinkers. Because the educational system and the culture tells you, stop imagining, stop creating, stop thinking outside of the box, stop being unique. There's only one answer. We already know it. All you need to do is memorize the answer. You don't need to create the future. See, Moses was educated in the ways of the Egyptians because God values the highest level of thinking. You were a linguistic savant and a creative genius, and Jesus wants to reclaim that in you. With God, there's nothing wasted. It's not too late. This month, I started learning how to speak Portuguese. Don't let anybody tell you you can't learn anything new at 60. I'm just getting started. Because my brain, it wants to tell me I'm stupid, and I keep telling it, nah, I'm a linguistic savant. You just forgot. I'm a creative genius. I just settled for less, and I conformed. God bless you. And then in verse 24, and all of you. And he goes on in verse 24, and then he saw one of them. Moses saw one of his fellow people. When he was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, and he saw one of them being mistreated by the Egyptians, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Now, I think it's funny, whenever I hear pastors and stuff talk about people in the Bible, they always pretend like everything they do is the right thing. And when Moses kills the Egyptian, I always hear these people try to explain how that was the right thing. By the way, Moses killing the Egyptian was a bad idea. That was not God's idea. That was not God's plan for Moses' life. That was Moses killing an Egyptian when he should not have killed anybody. Now, why would Moses see an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew and kill him? Don't you think it's sort of like an extreme response? Aren't there at least 2 or 3 other options? Like, stop. I mean, that's one option, right? Or, I'm the son of Pharaoh. Pull back. Or, push the Egyptian against the wall and say, cool it. Killing the Egyptian is sort of the extreme option. Where would Moses have learned that kind of value system? You see, Moses was not yet a son of God. He was still the son of Pharaoh. Moses did what his father Pharaoh would do. When you see someone displeasing you, you kill him. Moses was now the son of a man who ordered a genocide. And he acted just like his father, the Egyptian. And then he ran for his life. He thought he got away with it, but the next day he saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He tried to stop them, and they said, hey, are you going to kill me? Like you killed the Egyptian? And Moses, the hero, you know what he does? He runs for his life. That's what heroes do. When they have to face their own imperfection, they just run. But I want you to know something. Moses now has lived 40 years, and now he's about to waste the next 40 years of his life. And you can look at Moses' life and go, how could Stephen say when Moses was born, he was no ordinary child? He just wasted his life. But here's the wonderful thing. See, with God, nothing's wasted. See, without God, his story would have ended there. Moses was a murderer who ran for his life and lived his life as a coward, forsaking his destiny, losing his calling. There's some of you here, you think that you have lost your calling, you have forsaken your destiny, you've missed your divine moment because you've blown it. See, some of you have just made some terrible decisions in your lives, and you have to own the responsibility of your choices. Isn't it so frustrating when you know that the only person who cost you your future was you? Moses destroyed his own future by killing this Egyptian, and he ran for his life. And I'm so glad that failure doesn't stop God, but I want you to know failure is just God's material. Which I think is kind of funny, because when I was at that farm, I was trying to avoid stepping into like the poop. And Matthew's like, oh, that's just fertilizer. We just leave it everywhere. And I realized, oh, he doesn't see it as waste. He sees it as fertilizer. See, we see our failures as waste. Wasted effort, wasted time, wasted life, wasted dreams. But God says, no, that's not waste. That's fertilizer. What you call failure is just the fertilizer for your future. It was about 9 years ago now. Aaron and I were running our company together, and I woke up one day, and my business partner made some decisions, and next thing I knew, I lost everything. I watched like $5-6 million of my own assets disappear. Every penny that I had accumulated, I'd put back into the company, and it was all gone. And I had to fly back across the country and sit down with my wife, Kim, and tell her I lost everything. Now, my wife was an orphan. My wife was abandoned at the age of 8, left in government projects, starving, eating nothing but turnips. My wife lived in a foster home from the age of 8 to 18. She never heard I love you one time. She never owned anything that was hers at all. I had to go home and tell her I lost everything. It's one of the most humiliating moments of my life. So I flew across the country. I couldn't even hold down food. And I sat down in this little cafe with my wife, and I said, honey, I need to tell you what happened. And I told her what happened. I said, I lost everything. And my wife, Kim, without hesitating, looked at me and said one phrase that I'll never forget. When I said, honey, I've lost everything, she looked at me and she said, I thought I was your everything. Now, who says that? It's like out of a Jane Austen movie. It's like, I didn't have a good response. When she said, I thought I was your everything, I just went, well, I lost my other everything. You know, the everything that finances my everything. And yet, what Kim reminded me, she said, we've been poor before, and we've risen above it. And one of the things that I try to remind my friends who lose everything is when you started, you had nothing, right? And they always tell me yes. I said, so you started and you grew a multi-million-dollar company. You started and you grew a billion-dollar company. And they go, yes. And then you lost everything. They said, yes. I said, but when you started, you had nothing except what was inside of you. And so when you lost everything, the one thing you did not lose is the something you had before you had everything. And that's what they can't steal from you. That's what they can't take from you. And every time you fail, and every time you rise above it, every time the world falls apart and comes crumbling down, and you just push yourself back up and start walking through, every time everyone thought it was over, and you knew you were just getting started, it changed everything inside of you. Because you see, with God, there's nothing wasted. Takes every failure. And I just want to say this to all. Pastor Kevin was talking about how when we started, it was like with 20 people. And then they had like phenomenal church growth to 22 people. He said someone got sick, they would just, in fact, they were saying, you can't get sick, you have to come. If you're dead, you cannot come. And you know, when you're starting, it's more failure than success. When you're starting, it's a lot of bad talks with great people saying, that was really good, Pastor. And you know what I learned? Is I had people who saw things in me before they were real. And they just kept pulling it and pulling it and pulling it out of me until it became a part of me. And I want you to know something. Don't measure your future on your present. Don't measure who you're going to become on who you are right now, because you don't even know how far you've come. You are not who you were, and you're not who you're going to be. So live with it. Step into it. Fail and fail and fail with boldness. Mess up with courage. Don't worry about everyone else and what they say and how they criticize and critique. Just accept the fact that you're going to do the hard work of getting up and getting up and getting up. Man, when Moses messed up, it looked like it was over for 80 years. Oh, and by the way, that's how the story ends. Let me just kind of go there. Verse 29, when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. And after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. It says, Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. And God said, Moses, take off your sandals. The place where you're standing is holy ground. I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their groanings, and I have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. I think it's interesting. God says, I'm going to set them free, so I'm sending you. But here's the beautiful thing. You know what Moses is about to do? He's been wandering for 40 years in the wilderness, wasting his life. Can you imagine wasting 40 years of your life running in fear, living like a coward, knowing you're a killer? But Moses didn't go on killing. Moses made one huge mistake in his life. And while he lived those 40 years, he settled down, he got married, had kids. He tried to become a different man, but he was still living under the shadow of his failure. Let me tell you, people will want to define you by your worst moments, but God will define you by your best moments. Now, and God says to Moses, I'm going to send you to call my people out, and watch what's going to happen. Moses, 10 plagues come. Moses goes to the Red Sea, raises up his staff, because that's what he had in his hand. The waters part, they go through the waters, and instead of getting right to the promised land, what happens? They have to wander for 40 years. You know how hard it is to survive as a nation wandering in the wilderness for 40 years? Who has the skills to keep a people alive wandering in a wilderness for 40 years? Who in the world has that kind of resume? Who could say, hey, I've done that. I just spent 40 years of my life learning how to survive wandering in a wilderness. I thought these were 40 wasted years. Now I know these have been my training days. That when I thought I was running away, God was moving me forward. Don't you let that little voice in your head lie to you and tell you you can't make up for lost time. What you thought was lost time was God just using time without your permission to prepare you for your future. He didn't know they're going to be wandering for 40 years, but it's like Moses said, I got this. I know how to survive 4 days or 40 days or 4 months or 4 years. Oh, you need 40? Isn't it interesting that at the end of 40 years, God said, okay, Moses, you're done. This is what I trained you for. Now it's time to hand it over to Joshua. See, with God, there's nothing wasted. All your wounds, all your scars, all your pain, all your disappointments, God's going to take that to mold you to be the beautiful human being He wants you to be. Whatever path He takes you on, whatever education you have, whatever things you've learned, whatever you've learned through life and experience, there's nothing wasted there because God put you in the school of the Egyptians, not just the school of the Hebrews. Everything you're learning, God's going to use one day. See, there's nothing wasted. All your failures, every time you've messed up, every time you've blown it, the only thing that will keep you defined by your worst moments is if you refuse to move past that moment. So put your past in the past and start creating your future. Because with God, nothing's wasted. And there's no such thing in my mind as lost time. So let me tell you that as a guy who's lived now 60 years. Wow. If I could have only known then what I know now, I would have really messed it up. Because the ignorance, the innocence, the naivety, the lack of experience, the stepping into uncertainty, the mystery, that's what molded me. If I took all this knowledge at 60 into my brain at 20 or into my soul at 30, it wouldn't have made me better. I would have never gotten here if I hadn't have gone through there. So don't be afraid of where you are right now. Because what may feel to you as wandering is just God developing. God has you in school. But maybe it's time to graduate. Say, God, I'm ready. Because with you, there's nothing wasted. I am a futurist. Maybe I've lived in the past. Maybe I've messed up in the past. Maybe I've been carrying my past. But right now, I want you to cut your past and put it behind you. Let your past be behind you, your future in front of you. The future is waiting for the person with the courage to create it. Is that you? Is that you? I volunteer to create the future. How about you?